Ja, maar dat is superleuk te lezen. Mijn beste professor was.
So welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed Peter's talk and the break and the pizza and the evening at all. I am, as Peter introduced, I'm going to point out some very specific struggles we had with our latest project, and I will just show you. First, most interesting one I think is unit testing GraphQL, a GraphQL schema. How many of you are actually right now using GraphQL for something? 3. Nice. Well, more reason to sell it. Okay, so first, unit testing with GraphQL. Oh, by the way, my name is Jesse. Well, imagine a hello world GraphQL query. Well, I just saw 3 of you are actually using GraphQL, so I will show you the hello world GraphQL query. So what you see here is actually a defined whole GraphQL schema, and a schema is something you define once, and you see it here, new GraphQL schema. That's all, and that's a thing you only have to do once in your whole app, and then you define a query with a GraphQL object type, which I will come to later. And you have a mutation on the same level, which I didn't show here because they are actually kind of the same. Queries and mutations are actually the same thing in GraphQL. It's only that queries run in parallel and mutations after each other. Well, I define actually one query, but it has that one root query has multiple fields, and right now it has only one field, the field greet, and it returns a hello world with a certain type. And a type can be a GraphQL string, it can be a GraphQL int, float, number, or another GraphQL type. But for now, we just have the most simple example of a hello world GraphQL query. Well, how do you test this? Well, before that, I will just show you how the whoa. Uh-oh.
My eyes are not that good.
Please be bigger. Okay, resolutions. Sorry, Peter. Should have done this before. Graphical interface served by Apollo, and come on, and you can just fold open docs. That's the part Peter talked about, automatic generated API. You can just see I defined the root query type you saw in the presentation, and the greet query with the type string, and when I fold open the greet query, I expect a string. So right here I can just hit Control space and then, oh, okay, query, and then nested. This is actually GraphQL language, so it's not JavaScript, it's nothing, it's new. So Control space will just give you 2 options. Why not only one? Well, because my presentation isn't in sync with the code. But it has the greet and the hello world as response. That was Command Enter. That's the play button. Okay, so this is a development tool, the screen you see right now, and actually it's actually you should. Well, that's questionable, but most people disable it on production. So now you see how the query is defined. I go back to my presentation. How do you actually test a GraphQL defined GraphQL schema? How do you unit test it? And yeah, we actually have two problems with that. Well, GraphQL is mounted with Express to an endpoint, let's say /GraphQL, because that's the default endpoint when using GraphQL. GraphQL.js, implementation of GraphQL. And HTTP endpoints testing is complicated. You shouldn't do it probably because it can expect headers, it can expect query params. Well, it's complicated, and you probably want to test GraphQL schema directly. When you have the GraphQL object, then run a test on it. That's it. No HTTP between it. And well, you can't intercept an Apollo server for that. But then I found the solution that GraphQL exposes a execute function, which you can execute, which you can call right here with the schema you defined. So that will be the instance of a GraphQL schema you saw earlier. And the document AST. So that is another way of defining your, well, this is a way of defining your GraphQL query you saw back in the development tool, but GraphQL tag is actually a function which will transform your query string, because this is a string, into an abstract syntax tree, a document AST. And you pass that to execute, because that's the API of execute, and it will return a promise with the response. So this will be hello world right here. So you don't need any mounting to, don't need any exposing to any endpoints. So you can test this like this. And when you put this in a test, it will look like something like this. So you all know describe and it maybe. But the thing is, because execute is returns a promise, it is asynchronous. So you have to call the done function of the it to do this. So this is our test, and it works. So let's demo that. Oh, demo time. Whoa. Okay, so let's run those tests with Mocha. Should have done this. Oh, sorry, yeah?
Short question. Did you come up with importing the execute function of GraphQL to do the testing on the server yourself, or did you find it somewhere?
I just looked into the code of Apollo, how it called
nice.
how it called GraphQL.
That's very clever.
Thanks. Oh, no, don't Spotify. Okay, so our tests run, failure 0, and it passed, should resolve hello world, and I can expand it and I can see the test is actually run. So that's a very cool thing. This page you see right now is actually generated by the Mocha package, the Atmosphere Mocha package of Meteor, which is defined when you run Meteor test. This command, Meteor test -- driver package, and then the Atmosphere package. Okay, so this is a cool thing, and let's jump into our code for a little while. Okay, so our schema right now is this, so it looks like the one in the presentation, and the to-dos query is defined beneath, and it just does does not simply return a string, but it actually returns an array of labels, just to-do objects. And when you query it, it looks like this. So you have the to-dos, and then the nested label. Running the query will result to this. And it can receive, as you may have seen, a limit variable argument, and you can define the limit like this. So now I have only one to do. And the thing is, with GraphQL, you can't just insert you cannot just insert any JavaScript variable in here. So what GraphQL did is create an interface of, you have the query, you may have seen the query variables corner right here. There you can define any query you want. It's JSON actually, so a little bit JavaScript again. You can define the limit here, and then you can refer to it like this, but you have to define the type of limit here beforehand. So this will work either. Just like this. How do you do that in a unit test? It will. I don't have it in my presentation, but I will show you here. This is what you saw in my presentation. You may see that it's not a promise anymore, which I will come to next. But this is the unit test for a GraphQL query with variables. So it looks like this. I import my own execute wrapper, and that's because the execute API is just argument 1, argument 2, argument 3, and variables is like the 6th argument of the execute function, and I use variables a lot. So I would have to execute, pass the schema in every unit test again, passing schema, then the document AST, then null, 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 and then as the 6th argument I would have to pass the variables. So I made a wrapper function not only for that, but also to de-async the thing. So you don't need that done function anymore. And that helper looks like this. So it's just a wrapper for GraphQL's execute function, but it receives arguments in a more convenient way, and it de-asyncs it. So it's pretty simple, and I use this function in every unit test to test my GraphQL queries. So.
And this is on GitHub.
This one I will. Yes, this one is actually on GitHub.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on GitHub. Oh, almost. This one. So you can review this whole code base on GitHub, and it has the execute GraphQL JS. At the end of my presentation, I will show you this one more time at the last slide, so you can write it down or something. Okay, so that's one thing. Well, I love GraphQL, and I'm actually married to GraphQL.
Is that?
For a couple of reasons, which you can ask after my presentation. But this is one of them. Okay, so then we have the second part of my presentation, because I had 2 parts. Oh, actually, there's one more thing. Yes. Wanted to say that my whole life. What if Your GraphQL query returns data from your database. And how do you test it then? What do you do then? Well, therefore, you have factories, and that's made possible by the deep world factory package. This one. And what factories do is actually you predefine factories. For example, a factory for a to-do, and when you run factory.create to-do, you will get this returns the JavaScript object with probably random data. Not only that, but it also inserts it into an empty database. So when your GraphQL query in its resolve function calls the database, it will get that by the factory created document. So you can expect very specific data back from GraphQL. And that is something I don't have an example of, but it works. Yeah.
In this case, because you are like not really using like the HTTP and stuff like that, and you can easily stop like this the call to the database, right?
No, it actually
using sign-in or something to stop out. It would have the same effect to return like some fake results.
So the question is, does it stop the database call? Does it?
Well, if you instead of using this factory, if you're not using MongoDB, but you're using another data source, then it would be easy to just stop.
Oh, then you will have to mock it another way. This is really only for Mongo databases. So that's a good question. But I mean your Mongo database from Meteor. Yeah. More questions about this? Great.